Welcome to the video, The Magical Nature of Constructed Reality, Changing Reality with a Word. My name is Dr. Stephen Bacon. I'm a clinical psychologist in Santa Barbara, California, and I've spent the past decade writing books and researching exactly how psychotherapy works. The challenge. The outcome research analyses have shown that most of our assumptions about psychotherapy and the related field of personal growth are fundamentally flawed. As Thomas Kuhn wrote, though the world does not change with a change of paradigm, the scientist afterward works in a different world. Obviously, the research analyses challenge the existing paradigm. Those who integrate it into their lives find themselves with such an abundance of new choices and possibilities that it is like living in a new world. It takes some work to move from one world to another. This third video takes us further down the path that began with the research and ends with a new set of possibilities and potentialities. Social constructionism. As mentioned in the first video, in 1966, Berger and Luckman wrote a seminal book called The Social Construction of Reality. Part of the book focused on how mental health operates in different cultures. They began with the concept that human suffering is real and universal, but the explanations for the suffering and the prescribed healings and cures for the suffering are constructed. For example, in a culture where mental health problems are explained by malevolent spirit possession, the spirits are constructed and the solutions, the exorcisms, are equally constructed. Berger and Luckman argued that every culture generates a constructed mental health model, including Western psychotherapy. Western psychotherapy agrees that all other cultures' mental health models are constructed, but they believe that Western psychology, because it is based on science, is not constructed. They argued that since it isn't constructed, the principles of Western psychology are solid, cross-cultural, and universally applicable, just like antibiotics or how to build a suspension bridge. Science fails in constructed reality. Unfortunately for Western psychotherapy, previous videos and articles have documented how basic scientific assumptions are violated by the mental health world. More specifically, in mental health, we can't define our terms scientifically. We can't measure feelings and other psychological concepts accurately and independently, and we don't even agree on basic terms. For example, in some psychotherapeutic systems, the unconscious mind is the central tenet. Other systems deny that the unconscious mind exists. Science has been unable to resolve this contradiction. Perhaps most importantly, after laboring for over a century, none of the behavioral scientists have discovered anything, any privileged knowledge, that improves outcomes. Moreover, we have shown that the much vaunted techniques are actually placebo-driven rituals. If these bright explorers, who understood the principles of science, were unable to apply it successfully, it must be because they were attempting to use the right tool in the wrong place, the wrong reality. The implicit good news. This critique of the science claims of Western psychology suggests that Berger-Luckman are correct, and Western psychotherapy is just as constructed as other mental health models, such as spirit possession, the evil eye theory, or the deficits of a spiritual substance like mana. What this implies for personal growth seekers is that their mental health problems, their hang-ups, their traumas, and their issues are just as constructed as individuals who believe their problems are secondary to spirit possession. Put another way, your suffering is real, but your explanations for your suffering and what you imagine is necessary to resolve your suffering are constructed, are made up, and not real. Trying to understand this and then to apply it to your real-world challenges is what this new approach is all about. The major benefit of this model is that it is a lot easier to resolve constructed issues than Western mental health issues. You really can experience the same set of possibilities and freedoms as a person from an exorcism-centered world who has just discovered that malevolent spirits don't actually exist. Constructed reality versus fundamental reality. However, it's a bit of a journey to move from a theoretical understanding that my problems are constructed to a pragmatic ability to apply the information in a way that meaningfully relieves my personal suffering. The first step is to understand what constructed reality refers to and how it interacts with fundamental reality. Berger and Luckman use a basic cross-cultural approach to this question and see the beliefs that differ across cultures as constructed and what is true across all cultures as part of fundamental reality. In this sense, standards of female beauty, the definition of honor or duty, and the concept of what defines mental illness would be constructed, and how to set a broken bone, how to make steel, and trees, rocks, and houses would be part of fundamental reality. Social constructionism. That's fairly simple so far, but one has to add the concept of group endorsement. The social part of social constructionism refers to the concept that when all around us believe in a worldview or an idea, it feels solid and real to us as well. This principle explains why it is difficult for most people to differentiate between constructed and fundamental reality. From inside the culture, they both feel equally solid and real. Jonathan Haidt goes further and argues that the social pressure creates consensual hallucinations. Clifford Geertz wrote that man is an animal suspended in webs of significance that he himself has spun. That is, the world we live in is not really one made of rocks, trees, and physical objects. It is a world of insults, opportunities, status symbols, betrayals, saints, and sinners. All of these are human creations, which, though real in their own way, are not real in the way that rocks and trees are real. These human creations are like fairies in Peter Pan. They exist only if you believe in them. They are the matrix. They are a consensual hallucination. Constructed psychological concepts. To make constructionism more specific, we can examine how it impacts mental health by taking a look at this quote from famous psychotherapist Irving Yalom. Quote, "The superego, the id, the ego, the archetypes, the idealized and actual selves, the pride system, the self system and the dissociated system, the masculine protest, parent, child, and adult ego states, none of these really exists. They are all fictions, all psychological constructs created for semantic convenience, and they justify their existence only by virtue of their explanatory power." Implications of Yalom. Yalom's quote can be extended. Imagine that he had said, "Everything that any therapist has explained to you about your condition, and any book you have read that seems to apply to you, has been completely made up. In that sense, you can take or leave whatever has been communicated to you." He did come pretty close to saying this. In fact, one could argue that he simply stopped listing concepts that were constructed because he had run out of space. The first implication of this is that your mental health reality is enormously fluid and can change quickly and profoundly from one truth to another. As we are about to see, constructed reality is so fluid that meaningful aspects of your past and your self-image can change with a word. In this sense, it is akin to a magical kingdom. Memory consolidation. For example, suppose you go to a therapist for help with panic attacks, and he convinces you that they arise from your childhood experiences with a critical father. This discussion requires you to retrieve memories from your childhood and examine how your father was critical. Psychology has relatively recently revised our understanding of how memory works. We now know that when we retrieve a memory and examine it, we change it in some way, sometimes a small way and sometimes large. When we stop our memory review, the changed version is now stored in place of the original version. This is called memory reconsolidation and has lots of implications for legal testimony, treating trauma, and general memory accuracy. When it comes to your new therapist, who has convinced you that your father was sufficiently critical to be a major factor in your current panic disorder, You can be confident that your reconsolidated memories of your father have all been adjusted in a critical direction. The process of explaining your panic attacks has resulted in meaningful and lasting changes to your past, your relationship with your father, and affected your personality and self-image. The next therapist. Imagine your first therapist had to stop working before finishing treatment because of an auto accident. As a result, you take your panic attacks to a new therapist. They listen to your history and assure you that your father doesn't sound that critical, but they are certain that poor peer relationships are the root of your panic disorder. Because this therapist is quite convincing, this discussion results in you reconsolidating all your peer relationship memories in the direction of dysfunction and social anxiety. And interestingly, you may revisit your father memories and alter them in a positive direction. Now your self-image is shifted in the direction of having an extensive history of impaired social relationships. Take a look at this from the therapist perspective. Each therapist was genuinely seeking a cause for your panic attacks. Remember that there are over 300 schools of therapy. While there are significant overlaps between the schools, there really are divergent theories about why a person might have panic attacks. One therapist will be predisposed to seek out a trauma as the basis for all mental health problems. The next might look at your relationship experience. The next looks at your attachment style. And the last looks for your cognitive misconstruals. Of course, they all listen to your history and tie their theories to whatever part of your history supports their theory. But remember that Yalom already told us that all their theories are fictions invented for explanatory purposes. The therapist perspective. It's also important to understand that as the therapist spins out their explanation to you, they are also convincing themselves that this fiction is a real and accurate explanation for your panic attacks. If the therapist is confident, the two of you create a socially constructed moment where your shared belief in the explanation convinces the other that it is indeed real. If you think that this is an exaggeration, review Donald Spence's work. Donald Spence was a psychoanalyst who wrote a book called Narrative Truth and Historical Truth. In this book, he argues that psychodynamic clients don't always remember their past traumas accurately. However, he discovered that they got equally better whether they worked through a historically accurate trauma or whether they worked through an imaginary trauma. Spence's work supports Yalom and suggests whether the explanation offered by the therapist is true or not. Accepting it and responding to it therapeutically results in meaningful healing. Put another way, both Spence and Yalom are arguing that constructed reality is so fluid that as long as the therapist and client buy into an explanation and the accompanying prescription, regardless of their literal validity, the client will get better. Yalom's perspective. Now imagine that you are Yalom. Yalom is one of the most famous living psychotherapists. He has had hundreds of clients and supervised hundreds of therapists. He has seen therapists that always create a reality, offer explanations based on attachment theory. Similarly, he has seen other therapists who typically use cognitive explanation. He has seen hundreds of clients adopt the explanations they have been given and reorganize their memories and sense of self as a result. Moreover, he has personally helped hundreds of people shift from one reality to another, one way of seeing themselves in the world to another. And his conclusion, after a lifetime dedicated to the psychotherapy process, is that all these shifts are based on fictions. This is such a central idea. When we just look at one therapist, it appears that they have discovered the real cause underlying the panic attacks. It appears they have offered an accurate explanation. When we imagine 3 or 4 therapists working with the same client and creating not only different explanations, but literally shifting client memories and self-images, we begin to understand just how fluid reality is in the mental health milieu. Return to the exorcists. Recall that the exorcists explain mental health symptoms by attributing them to various malevolent spirits, all of which had different qualities and all of which were constructed. We can now see that the explanations we have in Western mental health are no more representative of the truth than the malevolent spirit explanations. The natural reaction is to hope that one school of psychotherapy could discover the real truth. Unfortunately, the research analyses just proved that all privileged knowledge is unrelated to outcomes. In sum, no school has a handle on the truth. How about the idea that the therapist discovered my truth? Well, if they had, then all competent therapists would explain your symptoms the same way, and that's clearly not happening either. A lot of this can be summarized by a simple phrase. In fundamental reality, knowledge is discovered. In constructed reality, knowledge is created. This suggests that therapists who think they are discovering client explanations are actually creating them. Moreover, the clients join the therapists and misconstrue a constructed explanation as a discovered real explanation. Stabilizing factors. We have used Yalom, Spence, memory reconciliation, and the concept of multiple therapists to help understand the profound level of fluidity and malleability present at the confluence of constructionism and mental health. Obviously, there are a variety of factors that can decrease fluidity and support stability. For example, a wife and her friends might remember the old paradigm and interact in ways that denies the new transformation. There might be some unconscious feelings that fight with the new reality. Biochemical factors have psychological correlates that promote stabilization, and the client could have a strong narrative that is resistant to alternative explanations. These and related factors are substantial forces. Addressing them is the subject of a later video. The need for something solid. If we return to the metaphor of exorcism, we can now see ourselves like exorcism clients who've been told there are no spirits, that the exorcisms are ritualistic placebos, and that they are free to move in many directions. This is encouraging, perhaps even exciting. Unfortunately, it can also be alarming and confusing, as we are left to wonder what's real and what's not. Yes, the old explanations have been deconstructed, but it's not clear what direction to move. At the end of the day, we need to feel that something is real and true if we are going to be able to see our way forward. We are making progress in terms of attaining fluidity, but using that fluidity in a constructive manner requires finding a foundation, a place to stand, to help us proceed.